Good morning, Liberty. It is Friday morning, April 19th, 2019. My name is Michael Bolton, broadcasting to you live from my home office and studio here in downtown Los Angeles for the 10th Amendment Center. We are broadcasting live as we do every Monday, Wednesday, Friday, 9:30 a.m. Pacific time through our channels over at YouTube, DLive, Facebook, Periscope. We also have archives at BitChute, BitTube, podcast version at iTunes, Spotify, and elsewhere. All that good stuff. I really appreciate you spending a little time with me today before the Easter weekend. And I think we're going to have a pretty interesting show. I saw a tweet a day or two ago, and I'm like, man, this needs to be talked about at some point. And basically, as you can see in the title or in the show notes over at 10thamendmentcenter.com/Good Morning Liberty, the title of this episode is that they all sound like Rachel Maddow on nullification. And now she was not the first, but I think she was the most prominent early opponent of our work to go public with a bunch of statements and do a full segment about how nullification is bad. And then, of course, if you support it, you're a neo-Confederate. You're a racist, you were on the side of the slave owners, and you led to the Civil War and the death of a bunch of people. You're a horrible person. Now, for those of you who are friends of my good friend Tom Woods, who he and Bob Murphy, after Tom's book Nullification came out, and this is a great book if you haven't gotten it yet, and you want to do some reading, that's a good one. It's probably on sale all over the place. But he and Bob Murphy basically did a spoof on this at some point, where Bob dressed up like a zombie and he was interviewing Tom on his book, and every question or response was basically the zombie saying racist or neo-Confederate. And that's really what they sound like. And some people think that this is the type of view that only comes from the left. And if you watched my episode about my extremist profile over at the Southern Poverty Law Center, let me see what date that puppy was. Just taking a look here. Previous episodes. Back in January 18th of this year. I have a link to it in the show notes on YouTube. And, of course, 10thamendmentcenter.com/Good Morning Liberty, my SPLC Extremist Files profile. Good Morning Liberty, January 18, 2019. So if you saw that, you know the SPLC, of course, hates what we do here. And, of course, wants to use that same type of messaging. But it isn't just the left. It's anybody who loves centralized power, whether it's a solution to one thing or to everything. And so we hear the exact same talking points from the left and the right. And I want to go through some of the primary ones. It's impossible to cover all of them, but I want to cover some of the primary ones today. And before doing that, of course, I want to say hi to some great people out in the live chat who are joining me this Friday morning or afternoon, wherever you happen to be. Justin Bayola, EHP Training, Robert Sanderson, The Falcon, Bob Brewer, Joe Standridge, and a few others over on YouTube. And then over on Facebook, Dan Reed, Charles, Justin, Bob, Gary, Denise, it looks like, and others over on Facebook. Thank you so much for joining me. Please continue, if you support the show, hit the like button, smash the like button, continue leaving some comments, share the links with some friends, all that good stuff. And if you don't like it, thumb it down. That's fine. Whatever, however you feel about it, let's do that. But let me get into some of these things that I wanted to cover today, and maybe we'll have a little fun with it. The first one is an article that I wrote back in April of 2011. And it's titled Toys in the Attic Strikes Again. LouRockwell.com picked up on this article. I think he gave it a different name over when they published there, or maybe it was Eric Garris who was running it at that point. And this was an article in response to Rachel Maddow's 14-minute segment about our work here at the 10th Amendment Center. She titled it Confederates in the Attic. This is a little tongue-in-cheek. She thought she was being fun, or maybe Steve Bannon, her producer and blogger, thought that this was funny. But from my article, it says, just this week, so this was published April 14th, 2011, just this week, Rach did a full 14-minute segment on the subject of nullification, and her presentation, as you might guess, wasn't a cheerleading session either. Primarily, she was attacking us. She cited 10th Amendment Center by name, and she spent all kinds of time going through things that we work on our website, pointing out how awful what we do is. Now, the segment titled Confederates in the Attic was about how efforts today primarily championed by the 10th Amendment Center to decentralize power and reject unconstitutional federal laws are somehow directly related to slave owners in the pre-Civil War South. And this is the standard left-wing talking point, that if you opposed central power, well, if you oppose central power while the Democrats are in charge, then you're a racist, you're a neo-Confederate, and you're bad. And we often heard from people, and I even heard it when I gave a speech at a Nullify conference in Fort Worth, Texas back in 2010. I made some comment about government people being thugs. You couldn't be more factual than that. It was just a dry statement in a speech or an introduction to an event. These thugs. And of course, someone in the audience is groaning like, oh, there goes the racism. They immediately think anything that you say is racism. And unfortunately, a lot of the general public picks up on this as well. But Maddow, again, she wasn't the first, but I think she was the most prominent. And the fact that she did this full 14-minute segment, I can't find a link to the original video anymore. Otherwise, I would have showed you or played some of it. If anybody can find it, you can leave a comment in the chat, whether it's live or in the archives, or send me an email, team@10thamendmentcenter.com, team@10thamendmentcenter.com, all spelled out. And I write in this article back in 2011. Man, I forgot about this. Sometimes it's fun to bring this kind of thing up. Alan Light says in the chat, idiot Maddow knows nothing about the Confederacy. Well, maybe she doesn't, or maybe she does and she's counting on the general public not knowing about the Confederacy or nullification. Primarily, now this isn't going to be a show about the Confederacy, what they did or didn't do. This is about nullification, the fact that they attack it as being, the general line is that if you support nullification, you're a racist, you want black people in chains, and you want to bring that back today. That's the kind of thing that we hear. And I write, no, it's not a joke that somehow people who reject federal power today are directly related to slave owners. That's not a joke. That's what she really was saying. Here's a quote. The Confederacy and its politics are in fashion again. Nullification led to anti-U.S. militancy, which led to cannons firing. Nullification, which helped steer South Carolina into its militant anti-U.S. stance, is now enjoying a remarkable renaissance. That's Rachel Maddow's quote. And I think that's awesome. The fact that we're having such a remarkable renaissance, that she's actually pointing that out, that is a factual statement. But she has to point it out in light of it being an awful thing. Look, you don't catch flack if you're not over the target. And I think that's the real message here. She calls us a conservative group. She says, a quote, a conservative group called the 10th Amendment Center has been pushing a lot of the anti-health reform stuff in the context of nullification. Absolutely. And they're pushing for other kinds of nullification, too. And I wrote, okay, other than the absurdity of using the term conservative to define an anti-drug war, anti-war, anti-Patriot Act organization started in 2006 in opposition to George W. Bush, she's right on the money there. So Rachel Maddow really, really kind of brought these talking points out into the mainstream back in 2011. And again, I did an entire episode on the Southern Poverty Law Center, and I just want to remind people, in case you weren't aware, they do have, since 2012, so the following year, they decided to highlight yours truly personally as one of the key activists of the emerging radical right. And of course, they included me with people like, I think like David Duke, things like that. Of course, they just want to say that you're evil, potentially racist, you're on the side of the slave owners. And that's what it says in the intro. Quote, Michael Bolton is an ideologue who has spent years promoting the idea that states can nullify federal legislation they don't like, the very same argument pushed by defenders of slavery and segregation, and just as baseless now as it was then. Again, the same message carried forward probably from thinkprogress.org, Rachel Maddow, MSNBC, Southern Poverty Law Center. This is the same talking point over and over and over. They talk about how nullification has gained wide support, just like Rachel was saying. Quote, it has gained wide support among hardline libertarians and neo-Confederates who are still angry at the powers the federal government accumulated after the Civil War that allowed it, among other things, to act against segregation, discrimination, and other social ills. So again, the message is the same. If you support nullification, the only reason you're doing it is because you want racial segregation and you have to be bad, without even getting into the discussion of any of those proposals in government. They just connect it all together, and that's the message. But no one may have been worse on this than Jesse Jackson. And I wrote a column that was published over at Town Hall, I believe it was, the following year in 2013. So we've got 2011, Maddow. And again, Maddow wasn't the first. We saw a lot of attacks before that. And then when Bush was in power back in 2007, 2008, they weren't really attacking us as being racist, but of course, we often heard that we were with the terrorists or we were communist. And then it switched to this kind of racist conversation, and it's really caught on with people who do not like resistance to federal power in any way. And Jesse Jackson put out this article talking about how this dangerous thing was rising. And I'm just going to read these 2 paragraphs. It's worth it. I don't normally like reading 2 paragraphs in a row, but I want to go through it, and then I want to talk about some people from the right today that are copying this exact same message, and to warn you against listening to any of them, because if they're saying this kind of crap, they just can't be trusted. That's my view. So here's what Jesse had to say. What is nullification? It's one of the last-ditch philosophical stands of the slaveholders. The historically disreputable and thoroughly discredited concept that a state could, quote, nullify a federal law by declaring it null and void. The idea of the slave power was that the southern states would interpose themselves between the national government and the slaveholders and prevent our laws from being enforced. Whew, there's a lot wrong there. I will get back to some 4 points that cover all the absurdities here. Paragraph 2. The concept was most famously expounded by South Carolina Senator John C. Calhoun almost 2 centuries ago. It has been struck down repeatedly by the courts and was never accepted outside the Confederacy. Since it was used mainly to protect slavery in the South, I apologize for the chuckle. Since it was used mainly to protect slavery in the South, it eventually helped lead to a horrible civil war, and eventually the idea was totally discredited. And I wrote quickly here in Jesse's 5 sentences explaining what nullification is, he didn't get one single sentence fully correct. Not one. So Jesse Jackson is the poster child for how you can get everything totally wrong on nullification. But of course, they're not alone. And while I think many people who are conservatives or on the right are not surprised to hear this, in fact, they're like, man, these people are complete idiots. A lot of the pundits that some of those same people champion, and now I'm not saying that anyone here watching or listening to this show has this view, but a lot of the same people who would attack these crazy left-wingers for what they are, being horrible and wrong, use the same talking points. Now, none of them came to our defense on nullification, of course. But what actually brought this to my attention was a tweet this week from Chuck Woolery. Now, Chuck has actually retweeted a number of our things that we've shared, and I believe he's actually even retweeted reports about efforts to resist or undermine or nullify federal acts in the past. Maybe not. Maybe he just was tweeting some things from us about the proper reading of the Constitution. I'm not sure. I know he's shared posts from the 10th Amendment Center in the past. But here's what he says just on, I guess it was Saturday, April 13th. And he's talking about this because he doesn't like immigration sanctuary cities. And I've done a whole couple of episodes on sanctuary cities, so that's not really a discussion here. But for some reason, he feels the need to drag nullification, the Confederacy, and slavery into his opposition. Because for some reason, he can't find a way to say that he's against sanctuary cities without slandering, that's the wrong term, without going after nullification and incorrectly tying it in with the South and the Civil War. And he says, quote, nullification of federal law is what the South did before the Civil War. Sanctuary cities are the same. And you thought Democrats have changed of 150 years? They never changed their behavior, only their speech. Yes, they are the real racist and bigots. So basically, and his isn't even as bad. It's just I'm triggered. And so he triggered me on this nullification comment, and it just reminded me of so many of the things that I've heard from the left over the years, and so many things over the years that I've heard from the right, and only from certain quarters. That if you support nullification, you are in a line of racists and bigots, and you are on the side of the South in the Civil War. Bob Brewer says he just needs some education. Well, maybe, but why the hell is the guy talking about something he doesn't know? Couldn't he just go after immigration sanctuary cities without talking about something he clearly hasn't studied? Because to me, that is an untrustworthy human being. I can't trust somebody who talks about someone they have no clue. Now, I've done episodes on things here where I'm like, man, this is a new topic to me. I don't really know, and I'm going to explore this with you. Let's go through this. Why not just be honest about that? I know you can't fit everything into a tweet, but he has no reason other than to use the boogeyman, the zombie boogeyman of nullification, racist, bad. And that's what they all do. And there are many other ways that he could approach this without that intellectually dishonest approach. Now, it's not just Woolery, and he's not even the worst. In early 2018, Jeff Sessions and Tom McClintock also put out the Rachel Maddow talking point. And I think anyone who supports these guys should be embarrassed of them. Why do they have to sound like Rachel freaking Maddow? Maddow couldn't be the worst poster child. She couldn't be worse as a poster child for talking points for conservatives. But yet, conservative leaders use the same talking points as Maddow and the Southern Poverty Law Center. They absolutely shouldn't be supporting this kind of garbage. Here's what Jeff Sessions said. Quote, there is no nullification. There is no secession. Federal law is, quote, the supreme law of the land. I would invite any doubters to go to Gettysburg, to the tombstones of John C. Calhoun and Abraham Lincoln. This matter has been settled. You're not allowed to secede. You're not allowed to nullify. Federal law is always supreme. Wow. 3 short sentences, 3 things 100% wrong. And then, of course, he has to say, he could just say, look, he could just get those things wrong. I don't agree that you can nullify. I don't agree that you can secede, even though the country was founded on secession from the British Empire. And I also believe that the Supremacy Clause says all federal law is supreme, even though it doesn't say that. I can just make that up. He could just get that wrong. But somehow he has to tie in the Civil War. And that is exactly what Rachel Maddow and the Southern Poverty Law Center and Jesse Jackson does. That's what they've done. That's what they always do. And now this Maddow segment wasn't the only one. You can look up nullification on the MSNBC Maddow website, and you're going to find all kinds of blog posts, generally from Steve Bannon, that say the same thing over and over and over. The Center for American Progress, thinkprogress.org, Ian Millhiser is the greatest defender and clown over there. They say the same kind of garbage. So why are they using the same talking points? Maybe you can come up with and tell me why. I don't know. I can't speculate. I mean, I can, but it's probably not very positive. Now, Sessions, again, wasn't alone in 2018. Tom McClintock, I'm not sure if he's still in office, representative in California, claimed that nullification was a tool that, quote, began with tariff disputes in 1832. Now, this completely ignores the fact that Jefferson wrote the Kentucky Resolutions of 1798, and his original draft said specifically that when the federal government does things outside of federally delegated powers in the Constitution, I didn't really word that well, but I think you get the drift. When the federal government does stuff that they're not supposed to, a nullification of the act is the rightful remedy. They didn't include that exact phrase in the version that was passed in 1798, but they did include it in a resolution, a follow-up resolution in 1799. So the idea that nullification began with tariff disputes in 1832 is again trying to tie it to South Carolina, John C. Calhoun, and the South. And for people who don't study this, they immediately think racist and bad, and they don't want to be associated with that. They're really, really just bad. Of course, it's not just those guys. What did Dick Morris have to say? Dick Morris also in 2018, it's almost like they sent out some talking points and we started seeing columns over and over and over from these same people, Jeff Sessions, McClintock, Dick Morris, and then we're going to get into my buddy John Bolton, who may be the dumbest of them all. He's equal to Jesse Jackson on this stuff. Dick Morris sang the Maddow tune this way. This is an article from Mike Meharry in April 2018. Quote, "Not since Senator John C. Calhoun induced the South Carolina legislature to disregard federal laws imposing tariffs on imports has the doctrine of state nullification reared its ugly head." So Dick Morris has no problem talking about something he has never, ever studied. How can you trust somebody who's willing to make a definitive statement about stuff when he has no knowledge of the history? It's not bad to be ignorant of really unique niche history lessons, but why would you say that? Where did he learn this? Is he happy just, and I shouldn't say parroting because I own two, and I don't want to tie my two little birds in with Dick Morris because he's a piece of garbage. But why is he talking about it like this? He has never studied it, because if he had, he'd know for a fact that nullification was used by the anti-slavery North throughout the 1850s. He's pretending that that never existed, or he just doesn't know. And maybe it's okay for him to be ignorant, but he shouldn't be talking about it as an expert. He did an entire article talking about how nullification is bad, and this is where it comes from. Now, in the show notes over on YouTube, and again over on 10thamendmentcenter.com/goodmorningliberty, I put a link to my episode on nullification versus the Federal Fugitive Slave Act. That was on March 25th, 2019. Again, 10thamendmentcenter.com/goodmorningliberty. I know I keep saying that over and over and over. It's the marketer in me that knows that you have to repeat it for people to remember it, and I know that I'm just trying to help out on that. So this is, again, complete lie and untrustworthy garbage. Itemon over on YouTube. This is great. Rothbard quote, loud and vociferous opinion on economic subjects while remaining in the state of ignorance. It is no crime to be ignorant of economics, which is, after all, a specialized discipline and one that most people consider to be a dismal scientist. But it is totally irresponsible to have that loud voice and talk about it. It is totally irresponsible. And that's what they're all doing. Now, maybe they're not ignorant, and I don't actually know. They could be totally aware, but just lying to try to manipulate public opinion, and that makes them even worse. Either way, they're bad. So Maddow, Southern Poverty Law Center, Jesse Jackson, Chuck Woolery, Jeff Sessions, Tom McClintock, Dick Morris, and then who else do we have here? Oh, my buddy John Bolton, one of the worst of the worst. This is really amazing. He did this in an interview, I believe, on the radio, on Sirius XM, on Breitbart News Daily back, again, March of 2018. It seemed like this was a repeated message, as if Jeff Sessions sent it out to his buddy to say, you know what, you got to start parroting this message. Again, that phrase. He said, nullification was also proposed by South Carolina John C. Calhoun before the Civil War to say that South Carolina and other slave states would not enforce federal laws regarding slavery. Now, I don't know how anyone could ever make that statement. First of all, if you supported slavery, there was nothing to nullify. So the South, let's say the South was trying to nullify federal laws on slavery. There was nothing to nullify. The only people who were nullifying in regards to slavery were the northern states. And again, an entire episode that I did on this just in March, last month, talking about the northern states that were nullifying the federal slavery laws. Black Bomber over on YouTube says, John Bolton is the worst neocon ever. Why anyone would ever let him have a job in Washington, D.C. again baffles me. Yes, we have to remember who hired him, and that is a really, really bad hire. So he's saying that South Carolina used nullification to support slavery. And again, it's the same message, again, from Rachel Maddow, Southern Poverty Law Center, and the rest. Now, before closing it up here today and heading out for the Easter weekend, I'm going to do a little bit more work today, but I think I'm going to cut it a little bit short and take a little time off. But there are 4 points that I put in response to Jesse Jackson in the article that I wrote back in 2013. So if we remember, Jesse had 5 sentences explaining nullification and its history, and every single sentence he got something wrong. So let's just go over 4 facts, and we can run with that. First, nullification was never used to protect slavery. Never. And I wrote this. Nullification wasn't, quote, mainly used to protect slavery, like Jesse said. It wasn't used to protect slavery at all. This just begs the question. Since slavery was still allowed on a federal level, and they had a federal act on the books, the Fugitive Slave Act of 1793, and then the follow-up Fugitive Slave Act of 1850, to help return runaway slaves to the South, which the northern states nullified. Since slavery was still allowed on a federal level, what would slave states need to nullify? Nothing. Not once did such a thing happen ever. 2, second fact, virtually all northern states used nullification to resist federal slave laws. Already covered that in that full episode. 3, leading abolitionists actually supported nullification. So this isn't just... This wasn't just some kind of a weird kind of a sideshow that's interesting for the history books. It was actually talked about by leading opposition to slavery. For example, John Greenleaf Whittier, the poet from Massachusetts, said, quote, "Since the passage of the Fugitive Slave Law by Congress, I find myself in a position with respect to it which I fear my fellow citizens generally are not prepared to justify. So far as that law is concerned, I am a nullifier." And following up on that, William Lloyd Garrison, he was the head of the abolitionist newspaper, The Liberator, very famous at the time. He wrote in support of Whittier. He said, quote, the nullification advocated by Mr. Whittier is loyalty to goodness. So if you opposed nullification at that time, you were on the side of the slave owners, not on the side of the abolitionists. And then, of course, Jesse Jackson said that the slave power loved nullification, but this is wrong. Jefferson Davis, Confederate president, was actually opposed to nullification, and he kind of hit on it in his farewell address to the Senate. And then when South Carolina seceded, they complained about nullification in the North as well. So Dan Reed asks, do you have a year for Whittier's quote? Whittier, I don't know. Let me see. I've got a link here. No, I just have a link to the Facebook. So this was in the 1850s. I'm guessing it's around 1852 or 1853. I'm sure we could probably do a Google search in quotes on this one and find it. So I'm sorry I don't have that. Scott McDermott says, Bud, you're a true joke. I don't know if he's talking to someone else. Maybe he thinks I'm a joke. I don't know. Thumb it down if you think it's stupid, Scott. Or maybe you think it's awesome and you're talking to somebody else. I don't know. Pop Basketball asks, I'm very interested in your ranking of presidents. I don't know. They're all pretty bad. EHP training sessions is an embarrassment to my state. Can you imagine being from my state? I mean, I live in Southern California. I've got Kamala and Barb and Nancy, and I forget some of these people. They're pretty bad here, too. Not to say that Jeff Sessions is less bad, because he's using the Southern Poverty Law Center's approach to say, and then he's also saying that all federal laws are supreme. He's as bad as you can get on the Constitution. Absolutely horrible. Alan Light put a link to an article, Red Republicans, Lincoln's Marxists. I have not read that, but interesting. Pop Basketball, good afternoon from Miami. Good to see you. Appreciate you being here. Neil Archer laughs a little bit about Jesse Jackson. Yeah, I was grateful that that town hall ran that. It was a little of a folksy piece, not really good, hard commentary, but I think they just liked the fact that it hit at Jesse Jackson, making him look like he was on the side of the slave owners, which he certainly was taking that side, even if by accident. Anyways, I hope you guys found this all very interesting. To me, it is very enlightening because it tells you, it reminds you that when you support the Constitution, you support liberty, you support decentralization, the 10th Amendment, and nullification as a path to getting that. Not that nullification will always produce liberty or something that you want in your area, but it is the recognition of the founders' system that when you have a giant geographic area with tons of people, and a wide degree of economic, political, social, religious viewpoints, you cannot have a one-size-fits-all solution, period. That was the system of the European powers, and they were always trying to fight amongst each other to force their way upon other states, other countries. And the founders wanted to avoid that. That's why the powers, as James Madison said, delegated to the federal government are, quote, few and defined. Those reserved to the states and the people are numerous and indefinite. The way that people are going to handle things in each state should be different. And the more that you have a one-size-fits-all solution, one-size-fits-all blob of everything, a national approach to everything, that's when you have the worst type of social unrest and opposition. I mean, it to me, that is the cause of so much of the online so-called hate today. Anyways, I appreciate you guys spending some time with me today. I hope you have a wonderful Easter weekend, whether you're celebrating Easter or 420 or whatever it may be, with friends, family, alone, watching TV, Netflixing, I don't care what it is. I hope you have an awesome weekend. I'm very grateful for you spending some time with me today. If you enjoyed the show or you hated the show, smash the like up or down. Continue leaving some comments. If you've got ideas for more shows like Pop Basketball did, you can leave it in the comments in the archive or email team@10thamendmentcenter.com. Have a great weekend. We'll be back next week, Monday, Wednesday, Friday, 9:30 a.m. Pacific time. And thank you again for watching. Take care.